Some machines don't just change an industry, they redefine what's possible. They turn dreams into dirt under steel wheels and transform backbreaking labor into mechanical poetry. Today, we're diving deep into the story of the Fordson Model F, the tractor that didn't just change American farming, it revolutionized it. From a war-torn world, desperate for food, to assembly lines, churning out hope on wheels, this is the machine that brought power to the people and put the future in every farmer's hands. This is the story of how one man's vision and one simple tractor changed everything. Chapter 1: The Man Behind the Machine. Before there was a Fordson, there was a farm boy with dirt under his fingernails and a fire in his belly. Henry Ford didn't just dream of building tractors, he lived the nightmare that made them necessary. Born in 1853 on a farm in Dearborn, Michigan, young Henry knew the soul-crushing reality of agricultural labor. Every dawn brought the same brutal truth. Farming was war against the land, and your only weapons were muscle, sweat, and stubborn animals that needed rest when the work needed doing. He watched his mother fade from the relentless toil. He felt his own back ache from sunrise to sunset, and somewhere in that pain, a promise was born. In his autobiography, Ford put it plain as day. He wanted to lift farm drudgery off flesh and blood and lay it on steel and motors. That wasn't marketing speak. That was a mission statement written in blisters and exhaustion. By 1907, Ford had already revolutionized transportation with his automotive experiments. But the farm kept calling him back. His first agricultural attempt, which he called the automobile plow, was crude and experimental. Traction engines existed, sure, but they were massive coal-burning behemoths that cost more than most farmers would earn in a decade. They were tools for prairie wheat barons, not the small family operations where America's food actually came from. What Ford understood, what separated him from every other manufacturer of his time, was simple economics married to simple engineering. The Model T had proven his philosophy. Make it light, make it simple, make it cheap enough that working people could afford it, and make enough of them that the price kept dropping. If it worked for automobiles, why not for agriculture? But there was resistance. The directors at Ford Motor Company wanted nothing to do with tractors. They saw cars and trucks as the future. Tractors were a distraction, a farm boy's folly. So Henry did what any stubborn visionary would do. In July 1917, he incorporated his own company, Henry Ford and Son, Incorporated. The name was deliberate. It honored his son Edsel and separated the venture from the automobile business. But more importantly, it sent a message. This wasn't a corporate decision. This was personal. This was a Ford family commitment to changing American farming forever. Chapter 2: Birth in a Time of Crisis. Timing, they say, is everything. The Fordson Model F was born into a world on fire. By 1916, when the first prototypes were completed, World War I was raging across Europe. The Western Front was devouring men by the hundreds of thousands, turning farmland into moonscapes of mud and blood. And here was the crisis that would make the Fordson matter. Those men dying in the trenches, they were the same men who should have been plowing fields and harvesting grain. The armies needed food, millions of soldiers needed feeding. But the workforce that grew that food was busy fighting. Britain faced potential starvation. The British Ministry of Munitions understood the mathematics of survival. They needed tractors, needed them desperately, and needed them now. Ford saw the opportunity not as profit, but as patriotic duty and proof of concept rolled into one. The British government placed an order for 5,000 tractors before American production had even properly begun. Think about that. 5,000 machines ordered sight unseen, based on prototypes and promises, because the alternative was famine. The first Fordsons built in Dearborn weren't sold to American farmers. They were shipped across the Atlantic to save Britain from starvation. These early machines were simply called the MOM tractors, standing for Ministry of Munitions. The name Fordson didn't even exist yet. That came later, in February 1918. As production ramped up and the brand needed identity, separate from a Minneapolis company that had already trademarked Ford Tractor Company by paying a clerk named Ford for use of his name. The timing of the name was perfect. By April 1918, with the war still grinding on, U.S. domestic sales began under County War Board distribution rules. The tractor was no longer just an export item. It was coming home, and American farmers, who had watched their sons and hired hands march off to war, suddenly had a steel solution to their labor shortage. The Fordson went into full mass production in 1917 at a hurriedly built factory in Dearborn, Michigan. Ford applied every lesson learned from Model T production. Assembly line techniques, interchangeable parts, standardized processes. It took 30 hours and 40 minutes to convert raw materials into the 4,000 parts used in tractor assembly, then bolt them together into a working machine. The debut price on October 8, 1917 was $750. That number mattered. It was less than some farmers paid for a good team of horses, and horses needed feeding every single day. The Fordson would run on kerosene, work without rest, and never need a barn full of hay. Sales in 1918 and 1919 didn't just boom, they exploded. By the end of 1919, Ford wasn't just making tractors, he was making history. The machine born in crisis was proving it could transform peacetime farming just as effectively as it had addressed wartime emergency. Chapter 3: The Revolutionary Design. Here's where genius separated itself from mere competence. The Fordson Model F didn't just work differently than other tractors, it was built differently, thought differently, and that difference changed everything. Walk up to most tractors of the era and you'd see the same basic architecture. A heavy frame, like a car or truck, with an engine and transmission mounted on it. Lots of metal, lots of weight, lots of cost, lots of parts that could break or bend. The Fordson threw that entire concept in the trash. Ford's engineers, led by Eugene Farkas and Joseph Galam, the same men who had designed the Model T, made a radical choice. They eliminated the frame entirely. Instead, they bolted the engine directly to the transmission housing, which bolted directly to the rear axle housing. These three major components became the frame. The engine, transmission, and differential housing formed a rigid unit that handled all the structural loads. It was brilliant, it was simple, it was cheaper to manufacture, and it was strong enough to handle the brutal stresses of fieldwork. This unitized construction, this frameless design, became the foundation that every future tractor would build upon. But the innovation didn't stop there. The heart of the machine was a 4-cylinder engine displacing 251 cubic inches. The bore measured 4 inches, the stroke 5 inches. It was based on principles proven in the Model T, but adapted for the sustained heavy loads of agricultural work. The engine produced 20 horsepower at 1,000 revolutions per minute. That might not sound like much by modern standards, but it delivered approximately 12 horsepower at the drawbar, enough to pull implements that would require 4 or more horses, and it could do it all day without rest. The engine ran on kerosene, though it could also burn gasoline or even alcohol. Like many machines of its era, it was multi-fuel capable by necessity. Fuel availability varied by region and season, so flexibility mattered. The Fordson solved the cold start problem with an elegant system. A small auxiliary tank held a few quarts of gasoline for starting. Once the engine warmed up, usually within 5 minutes, the operator switched over to the main 21-gallon kerosene tank. A vaporizer in the intake system heated the kerosene fuel and mixed it with additional air to achieve the proper mixture before it entered the inlet manifold. The ignition system borrowed directly from the Model T, a flywheel-mounted low-tension magneto paired with trembler coils. It was proven technology, which meant parts and knowledge were widely available. If something broke, and in farming something always eventually breaks, you could fix it without waiting weeks for a specialist. The air cleaning system used a water bath design. Air drawn into the engine passed through water, which trapped dust and dirt particles. This was critical because agricultural environments are incredibly dusty, and dust is death to engines. The water bath wasn't Ford's invention, but it was still relatively novel in 1917 and absolutely essential for engine longevity. The cooling system held 48 quarts of water in the radiator. That's 12 gallons of coolant, keeping the engine temperature stable through long days of heavy work. The transmission was a 3-speed constant mesh spur gear design with 1 reverse. The forward speeds ranged from approximately 2.25 miles per hour in low gear up to 6.25 miles per hour in high. A worm gear reduction in the differential provided the final drive. Early Fordsons didn't even have brakes. The high-ratio worm drive generally prevented rotation from the wheels back to the engine. So to stop, you simply depressed the clutch and let friction do the work. The rear wheels were fabricated steel, spoked and cleated. Early versions had 12 spokes. Later ones went to 14. These steel wheels with their angled cleats bit into soil and provided traction in ways rubber tires of the era simply couldn't match. The front wheels came in several variations: 10-spoked fabricated steel or 5-spoke cast iron designs. The entire machine weighed approximately 2,920 pounds. That's less than 1.5 tons. For comparison, Many competing tractors weighed twice that or more. The lightweight meant less soil compaction and easier transport, but it also meant the Fordson could get stuck more easily in wet conditions or struggle for traction on hillsides. The wheelbase measured 63 inches, the overall length 102 inches. It was compact, nimble for its time, and sized to fit through barn doors and navigate the tight spaces of small family farms. Everything about the design screamed efficiency. Fewer parts meant lower cost. Simpler construction meant faster assembly. Proven components meant reliable operation. The Fordson Model F was engineering stripped to its essence. Every ounce of complexity eliminated. Every dollar of cost removed. It was the tractor equivalent of a perfectly sharp knife. Simple, effective, and nearly impossible to improve upon in basic function. Chapter 4. The price that changed everything. You could revolutionize design all day long, but if working farmers couldn't afford your machine, you were just making expensive sculptures. Ford understood this like he understood his own heartbeat. The $750 initial price tag was the shot heard round the agricultural world. To understand why that number mattered, you need to understand the economics of 1917 farming. A good team of draft horses could cost anywhere from $300 to $600, depending on the animal's age, training, and strength. But that was just the purchase price. Horses needed feeding 365 days a year. They needed 20 acres of land just to grow their hay. They needed barns, harnesses, veterinary care. They needed rest and got sick and had bad days when they didn't want to work. Factor in all the costs over a few years, and a team of horses could easily cost more than a Fordson. And the Fordson worked harder, longer, and never needed a day off. But Ford's competitors were charging double or triple that price for their tractors. Some machines cost $1,500 or more. International Harvester, Roomley, Case. These established manufacturers had built their pricing around what large commercial operations could afford, not what a small family farmer scraping by on 160 acres could manage. The Fordson changed the calculation. $750 was real money, no question. But it was achievable money. A farmer could save for it, could scrape it together, could justify it to his wife because the math actually worked. More work done with less labor meant more acres planted, more crops harvested, more income generated. The tractor would pay for itself. But Ford didn't stop there. As production ramped up and the assembly line efficiencies kicked in, Ford did what he'd done with the Model T. He dropped the price. By the early 1920s, a Fordson could be had for as little as $395 in some markets. That price drop triggered an earthquake in the tractor industry. Competitors had to slash their prices to compete. Some manufacturers went out of business entirely, unable to match Ford's production costs. The market consolidated, innovation accelerated. And most importantly, tractors became genuinely affordable to average farmers for the first time in history. In 1921, Fordson tractors represented about half of all tractors sold in the United States. Half. Ford had captured 50% market share, not through superior performance or advanced features, but through relentless focus on affordability and availability. Think about what that meant for American agriculture. Hundreds of thousands of small farms suddenly had access to mechanical power. The backbreaking work of plowing, dissing, and harvesting was being lifted off human backs and placed on steel and motors, exactly as Ford had promised. The math worked for farmers in ways it never had before. One Nebraska farmer named Herbert, interviewed years later, described it simply. With horses, you'd work until noon, rest the animals, then work until evening. With the Fordson, you could work straight through if the weather held. He and his family farmed more land because of it. Another farmer, Kenneth Jackson, pointed out the secondary benefits. The acres formerly used to grow hay for horses could now grow cash crops for market. That meant more income from the same amount of land. This wasn't just about making work easier. This was about making farming more profitable, more efficient, more capable of feeding a growing nation. And it all came back to that price. $750 to start, dropping to under $400 at its lowest point. That was the price that changed farming forever. That was the number that put mechanical power in the hands of the many instead of just the wealthy few. Chapter 5. The Assembly Line Miracle. Here's something most people don't realize about the Fordson's impact. It wasn't just what the tractor did on farms that mattered, it was how it was made. The Fordson Model F was the first tractor to be truly mass-produced using modern assembly line techniques. Before Ford, tractor manufacturing looked more like custom fabrication, small batches, skilled craftsmen, long build times, high costs. Each machine was almost individually made. Ford threw that entire model out the window. The Dearborn plant, built hurriedly in 1917, was laid out specifically for flow production. Raw materials came in one end, finished tractors rolled out the other. In between, carefully orchestrated stations performed specific tasks in specific sequences. This wasn't accidental. This was the industrial philosophy that had made the Model T the most successful automobile in history, now applied to agricultural equipment. The engine castings arrived at one station, were machined at another, assembled at a third. The transmission cases followed their own path. The axle housings traveled their own route. Then, in a precisely timed ballet of production, these major assemblies came together. The engine bolted to the transmission. The transmission bolted to the axle housing. The fuel tank, radiator, wheels, seat, and controls were added in rapid succession. 30 hours and 40 minutes from raw materials to finished tractor. That was the cycle time. Compare that to competitors who might take days or even weeks to build a single machine, and you begin to understand Ford's advantage. Speed of production meant lower costs per unit. Lower costs meant lower prices. Lower prices meant higher sales volume. Higher volume meant even better economies of scale. It was a virtuous cycle that competitors simply couldn't match without fundamentally restructuring their entire manufacturing approach. The numbers tell the story. In 1917, the first year of production, Ford built just 259 tractors, as the factory was still ramping up. By 1918, production exploded to over 34,000 machines. 34,000 tractors in a single year. That was more than many competitors would build in a decade. By 1923, Ford was cranking out more than 100,000 Fordsons annually. The assembly line hummed day and night, turning out roughly 400 tractors every working day. The scale was unprecedented in agricultural equipment manufacturing, but mass production required more than just assembly line layouts. It required parts interchangeability. Every Fordson of a given production run needed to accept the same bolts, the same gaskets, the same components. This standardization meant that when something broke, and in farming things do break, replacement parts were readily available through the vast Ford dealer network. A farmer in Kansas could order a part and have it arrive within days, rather than waiting weeks or months for a custom fabrication. This part's availability and dealer network were just as revolutionary as the tractor itself. Ford had learned from the Model T that the product was only half the equation. Distribution and support made up the other half. So Fordson tractors were sold through Ford automobile dealers who already had relationships with customers, already had service facilities, already understood Ford products. When you bought a Fordson, you weren't just buying a machine, you were buying into a support system. The assembly line miracle extended beyond American shores. In 1919, Ford established a factory in Cork, Ireland, to serve European markets. That plant would produce approximately 7,500 tractors before economic conditions forced its closure in 1922. Production shifted to Dagenham, England in the 1930s, where Fordsons would continue to be built for decades. Even the Soviet Union got in on the act. Ford signed a contract in 1919 for a massive consignment of Fordsons to the USSR. Over 25,000 Fordsons were exported to the Soviet Union between 1921 and 1927. These tractors became propaganda symbols, featured on Soviet posters promoting collectivization and mechanized agriculture. The Soviets even began manufacturing their own Fordson clones and replacement parts. Between 1917 and 1928, approximately 755,000 Fordson Model F tractors were produced globally. Over 747,000 rolled out of American factories. The rest came from Ireland and England. 750,000 machines, all built using the assembly line methods Ford had pioneered. That's the definition of mass production. That's what it looks like when manufacturing innovation meets agricultural necessity. The Fordson wasn't just a tractor. It was proof that modern industrial methods could be applied to any product. any industry, any problem. It was Henry Ford's assembly line vision, made manifest in steel and wheels, proving once again that how you make something can be just as revolutionary as what you make. Chapter 6: The Impact on American Farming. Let's talk about what happened when 755,000 tractors hit the fields of America, Europe, and beyond. This wasn't just a change in how farming looked. This was a fundamental transformation in what farming could be. Before the Fordson, the average American farm ran on animal power supplemented by human labor. The typical 160-acre family operation might have 2 or 3 teams of horses, hired hands during harvest season, and everyone from grandma to the youngest kids helping with the work. The pace of agriculture was dictated by how much a man and his animals could accomplish in a day, and that pace had remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. The Fordson changed the pace. Suddenly, a single farmer with a single machine could plow as much land in a day as 5 men with teams of horses. The economic implications were staggering. More acres plowed meant more crops planted. More crops planted meant more harvest. More harvest meant more income. But it went deeper than simple multiplication of output. The Fordson changed the calendar of farming. With horses, you were limited by weather, daylight, and animal endurance. If rain was coming, you might not get the field finished because the horses needed rest. With a Fordson, if rain was coming and the work needed doing, you could push through, refill the fuel tank, check the water, and keep going. The machine didn't tire. The machine didn't need a noon break. The machine worked until the work was done. This reliability changed risk calculations. Farmers could plant more acres because they had confidence they could harvest those acres in time. They could take on additional land because one man with a tractor could farm what previously required 3 men with horses. The labor equation shifted. Hired hands became less necessary. Sons who might have stayed on the farm to provide labor could pursue other opportunities. World War I had already demonstrated this effect. With hundreds of thousands of farm workers serving overseas, the Fordson made it possible for those who remained to cultivate more land with fewer people. That pattern continued through the 1920s and beyond. But the impact wasn't uniformly positive, and it's important to acknowledge that. The mechanization of agriculture, spearheaded by the Fordson, began a decades-long process of farm consolidation. Smaller, less efficient farms struggled to compete with neighbors who had tractors. Some farmers couldn't afford the initial investment and eventually sold out to those who could. The number of farms decreased while the average farm size increased. Rural populations began their long migration to cities. This was creative destruction on a massive scale, simultaneously increasing agricultural productivity while fundamentally altering rural American life. The Fordson also changed the landscape itself. With mechanical power, farmers could break prairie that had never been plowed before. They could clear land that would have been too difficult with animal power. They could drain wetlands and terrace hillsides. The environmental consequences of this expanded cultivation would become apparent in the 1930s, when drought and poor soil management practices combined to create the Dust Bowl. The Fordson didn't cause the Dust Bowl, but the expansion of cultivation it enabled certainly contributed to the conditions that made that ecological disaster possible. Yet, for all the long-term complications, the immediate impact was undeniably positive for most farmers who adopted the technology. Production costs dropped, yields increased, the physical burden of farming decreased. An industry that had remained largely unchanged since ancient times was suddenly modern, efficient, and productive in ways previous generations couldn't have imagined. By 1927, half of all tractors on American farms were Fordsons. Half. That market dominance represented hundreds of thousands of farmers who had made the calculation and decided this machine was worth the investment. It represented acres beyond counting that were plowed, planted, and harvested more efficiently than ever before. It represented the mechanization of American agriculture, the transformation from muscle power to machine power, the shift from ancient practice to modern industry. The Fordson Model F didn't just change farming. It redefined what was possible. It proved that mechanical power could be affordable, reliable, and practical for the average farmer. It demonstrated that American industry could produce machines at a scale and price point that democratized access to technology. And in doing so, it set the stage for the next 100 years of agricultural advancement. Every tractor That came after owed something to the Fordson. Every innovation in farm mechanization built on the foundation the Fordson laid. The machine that Henry Ford built to lift farm drudgery off flesh and blood and place it on steel and motors succeeded beyond even his ambitious expectations. Chapter 7. The Competition and Evolution. Success breeds imitation, and dominance invites challenge. By the early 1920s, the Fordson's market dominance had every other tractor manufacturer scrambling to respond. Some tried to undercut Ford's prices. Others attempted to outfeature the simple Fordson. All of them had to reckon with the reality that Ford had fundamentally changed what farmers expected from a tractor and what they were willing to pay for one. International Harvester, the agricultural equipment giant, felt the Fordson's impact most directly. Their tractors were well-built, proven machines, but they were expensive and designed for larger operations. The Fordson was stealing their customers. IH's response came in 1924 with the introduction of the Farmall, a row crop tractor that could cultivate between rows of growing crops, something the standard tread Fordson struggled with. The Farmall wasn't cheaper than the Fordson, but it offered capabilities the Fordson couldn't match. This was the beginning of feature-based competition rather than pure price competition. Other manufacturers followed similar paths. John Deere, Case, Alice Chalmers, and smaller companies all began developing tractors that either matched Ford's pricing or offered distinct advantages that justified higher costs. The tractor market was evolving from a simple choice between horse or machine to a nuanced decision about which machine best fits specific farming needs. But Henry Ford, stubborn as always, refused to significantly update the Model F design. He'd created a machine that worked, that sold, that dominated the market. Why change it? This intransigence would eventually cost him his dominance. Throughout the 1920s, competitors added features Ford ignored: high-tension magneto-ignition instead of the temperamental trembler coils, governors to regulate engine speed, power takeoff systems to drive auxiliary equipment, rubber tires for road travel, and reduced soil compaction. The Fordson stuck with its 1917 design, making only minor improvements. The Trebler coil ignition, borrowed from the Model T, was notorious for being finicky and difficult to start in cold weather. Competitors offered more reliable electric or magneto-ignition systems. The Fordson lacked a governor, so engine speed had to be manually controlled and could vary under load. Competitors offered governed engines that maintained consistent speed regardless of load. The Fordson's steel wheels were perfect for field work, but brutal on roads and created significant soil compaction. Competitors began offering rubber tires as standard or optional equipment. By 1927 and 28, the Fordson's weaknesses were becoming more apparent than its strengths. Sales were slipping. The competition had caught up and in many cases surpassed the once revolutionary design. In February 1928, Ford made a decision that shocked American agriculture. He ended Fordson production in the United States. After building 739,977 Model F tractors in America, the Dearborn assembly line went quiet. The official reasons included competition from International Harvester and other manufacturers who had successfully adopted row crop designs, plus Ford's need to retool the factory for production of the new Model A automobile. But the underlying truth was simpler. The Fordson Model F, as originally designed, had reached the end of its competitive life in the American market. Production continued in Ireland and England, where Ford still had strong market positions and where agricultural conditions differed from America. A new Model N, introduced in 1930, finally addressed many of the Model F's shortcomings with a more powerful engine, high-tension magneto-ignition, and a flyball governor. This updated design would continue in various forms through World War II and beyond, particularly in British and Commonwealth markets. The Fordson's American story had a final chapter. In 1939, Ford introduced an entirely new line of tractors developed in partnership with Irish inventor Harry Ferguson. The Ford Ferguson 9N incorporated Ferguson's revolutionary three-point hitch system, which allowed implements to be hydraulically raised and lowered and provided automatic draft control. This design philosophy, pioneered by Ferguson and productized by Ford, became the standard for modern tractors worldwide. The 9N and its descendants would eventually recapture much of the American market Ford had lost when Model F production ended. But that's getting ahead of our story. The Fordson Model F's competition and evolution phase taught the industry critical lessons. Being first and being cheapest could establish a market, but sustained dominance required continuous improvement. Even revolutionary designs eventually became obsolete if they didn't evolve. The tractor that had changed everything couldn't itself resist change forever. Chapter 8. The Legacy. Walk through any tractor show in America today, and you'll find them. Restored Fordson Model Fs, their light gray bodies and bright red wheels gleaming, magnetos ticking, engines putting out that distinctive four-cylinder rhythm. These aren't just collectibles. They're monuments to the machine that made mechanical farming accessible to millions. The Fordson Model F's legacy extends far beyond the 755,000 machines that were built. Its real impact lives in the principles it established and the industry it transformed. First, it proved that agricultural equipment could be mass-produced using modern manufacturing techniques. Before the Fordson, farm equipment was built in small batches by skilled craftsmen. After the Fordson, every manufacturer had to adopt assembly line methods or die trying. The entire agricultural equipment industry was forced to modernize its production processes. Second, it demonstrated that tractors could be affordable for average farmers, not just large commercial operations. The Fordson smashed the pricing paradigm and forced every competitor to reconsider their cost structures. This democratization of access to mechanical power accelerated the mechanization of agriculture by decades. Without the Fordson's low price point, tractors might have remained expensive specialty equipment for another generation. Third, the unitized frameless design became the foundation for modern tractor architecture. While later tractors added features and improvements, the basic concept of bolting the engine, transmission, and differential housing together to form the structural frame remains standard practice today. Walk up to a modern tractor, and you're looking at a great-great-grandchild of Eugene Farkas's innovative design. Fourth, it established the importance of dealer networks and parts availability. The Fordson proved that the product was only half the value proposition. Service, support, and readily available replacement parts were equally critical to success. Every agricultural equipment manufacturer today maintains extensive dealer networks because the Fordson demonstrated how essential that infrastructure is. Fifth, it changed farming itself. The explosion of tractor adoption in the 1920s, led by the Fordson, marked the beginning of modern mechanized agriculture. This transformation increased productivity, reduced labor requirements, and fundamentally altered rural American life. For better and worse, farming after the Fordson was never the same as farming before it. The human stories are perhaps the most compelling part of the legacy. Thousands of farmers bought their first tractor because it was a Fordson and affordable. That first tractor changed their lives, their farms, their families' futures. It gave them more productive time, less physical burden, and greater economic opportunity. It allowed sons to leave the farm for education or other careers, because one man with a tractor could now do what previously required multiple workers. It enabled aging farmers to continue working their land when physical labor would have forced them to retire or sell out. Collectors and enthusiasts today treasure their Fordsons for reasons beyond mechanical appreciation. These machines represent a pivotal moment in American history. They're tangible connections to the generation that transformed agriculture, that survived World War I and the Depression, that built modern American farming on foundations of steel and internal combustion. Every restored Fordson is a rolling museum piece, a working demonstration of how far we've come and how much we owe to the innovations of the early 20th century. The Fordson Model F isn't just a tractor. It's the tractor that proved tractors could work for everyone. It's the machine that took Ford's revolutionary manufacturing philosophy from the road to the field. It's the iron horse that finally replaced the flesh and blood horses that had powered agriculture since humans first scratched seeds into soil. In 21st century terms, the Fordson was the iPhone of its era, not the first of its kind, not necessarily the best engineered, but the one that made the technology accessible, affordable, and desirable to the masses. It changed expectations, it transformed an industry, it forced every competitor to up their game or go extinct. Today, more than a century after the first Model F rolled off the Dearborn assembly line, its influence persists. Every modern tractor embodies lessons learned from the Fordson's success and from its eventual supersession by more advanced designs. The balance between affordability and capability, between simplicity and features, between cost and value. These tensions still define the agricultural equipment industry, and they all trace back to the choices Ford made with the Model F. When historians assess the most influential machines of the 20th century, the Fordson Model F deserves its place in that upper tier. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't. Not because it remained dominant forever, it didn't. But because it was the right machine at the right price at the right moment in history, and because it used that moment to transform American agriculture permanently. That's the definition of a machine that changed everything. The Fordson Model F didn't just farm, it transformed farming. It made mechanized agriculture affordable, accessible, and unstoppable. Did your grandfather farm with one? Drop your stories in the comments. And if you love tales of the machines that built America, hit that subscribe button.